Well, good evening. Everybody play in place? Okay. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to introduce our, shall we say, retired president and CEO. But we'll leave that for a second. Right now, we want to just welcome everyone here. And also, we want to welcome everybody that is watching us over the various closed circuit TV and online. So welcome. And second, we want to thank our greeters who had a nice smile for you, Joy, and Gail. So let's have a thank you. We also have to acknowledge our audiovisual crew, which is Casey and the Sunshine members.
They moved the street. She was a social worker in El Monte and really interested in karaoke, line dancing, and Tai Chi. Czech, not so much, but she's gotten very, very involved. So please welcome Czech and Julie.
I can speak loud, but not that loud. Now, for our program of this evening, it is my pleasure to welcome Atherton's former president and CEO. Some of you might not have the pleasure of meeting him when he was still our president. So I will tell you a little bit about him. He was scheduled to retire 2019. And then COVID knocked on our door. We have to be so thankful, decided to stay with us and ride the whole thing with us. He was main instrument for a lot of issues that had to be dealt with the government, and also started a new job. He was a home delivery boy, door-to-door food, like many other Athertonians that had the power and the strength physically to bring food to us every meal, as you remember. Then after that, he actually added other things to his list of jobs that he had here. He was a rosebush trimmer. On heavy rains, you will see him walking up and down, looking to make sure that the gutters were free of debris. Then he will actually come here and try to entertain us. So we can say he was a player, a tennis table player, and a piano player with Fanny. Fanny, I told her one time when she was playing a couple of pieces with him and helping him with his lessons, I told Fanny, when you look at him with so much pride, like if he was your son. He'll be playing and she'll be just looking at him, just, this is my son, look what I'm doing. It was just such a treasure and pleasure to see that. And I mentioned that to Fanny many times. So now he retired and he moved, and he apparently is working a lot on the grounds with his wife. He does the heavy work and she does a beautiful job with the roses and plants and all that, right? So then he decided to one day go for a walk, just a walk. So he walked, and he walked, and he walked, and he walked, and found himself on one of the famous walks in Europe, which they call the Santiago de Compostela. So as he was walking, he ended up in Spain, finishing the walk of Santiago Compostela. So then when he did that, he said, well, I go home. Now I'm tired. So guess what? I'm going to sit down and write a book. So voila, he's here to present his book and talk about what's in it, how he's going to edit it, and how wonderful it's going to be for us to obtain one when he finishes, once it's published, because he's going to come here and promise that he's going to come and sign the books for us, right? Okay. Now, if we behave right now, and we do not ask too many questions, he is going to present to us, with Fanny, a delicious, beautiful treat, musical treat tonight. So let's give a nice warm applause to Craig so he can make his presentation about his book. The name is up there. And he does plan to go with the second book. He's doing the 50 years first, and he's going to go with the 60 years next. So let's just give him applaud and warm wishes, and thank you for being here.
So Fanny doesn't look at me with adoring eyes. She looks at me like a mother to a son saying, get your act together. We have been she's been practicing more than I've been practicing. And we have a little song for you tonight. We practiced this afternoon. I was Is that okay? Yeah. I don't think I missed a note. All right, let's. What'd you do, Casey? Okay. Oh, guess what? It ran out of battery. Casey, flip over to the Apple TV. You just had a piece of equipment pop? Okay. All right. All right. Give me a second to boot up. So, well, it's nice to be here. It's nice to see all of you and so many familiar faces. For those that don't know, I spent 12 years here as part of the staff and started as a development person. And then after Dennis McFadden retired, I spent a decade as the CEO of Atherton. And just absolutely had a delightful and wonderful time, and was exhausted when I was done. So I planned to retire, and then COVID happened, and so I stayed on to walk through that with the community, and then retired, and we were lucky enough to find Brett Meredith, and so it's been just a wonderful thing to do that. Oh, so when I was about ready to retire, and the anniversary of Atherton was coming up. It was the 110th anniversary of Atherton's. I thought I'd like to write a book about Atherton. And so I thought, but Atherton already has a book about its history. It's this book here called A Bright Spot on the Horizon. And actually there are some that are available, and you could pick one up if you want to. I think when I was here we were selling them for $5, and probably Elizabeth, if you went up to Elizabeth, Brett, maybe I'll bring some up tomorrow and if somebody wants one. But it tells the history of the physical changes and things that have happened at Atherton. But I said, what I want to do is I want to write a book about the people who have lived at Atherton over the last 110 years. And so that became my goal. And I thought, I want to publish it. I'm going to write a book, 110 people for 110 years. That's very clever, isn't it? Yeah. And then COVID hit. And so I just got worn out and didn't get the book done. And so after I retired, I started up again to say, I want to write this book. And I started and wrote a bunch of stuff and learned a bunch of stuff about the people who lived at Atherton. I'm going to tell you a few stories. But I got to 110 and realized I'd only covered the first 50 years of Atherton. So I've got 110 people for the first 50 years of Atherton. So now I got to find 110 for the last 60. So anyway, in the very first publication that really was started regular publications for Atherton, it was called the Atherton Reporter. Let me see. It's right here. And it was started in 1955, and I'll tell you a little bit about more of that. But in that particular publication, there was a little story to inspire people, and it was about a book that had been written in 1955 called Acres of Diamonds. And the idea behind the book was to give thanks for the good things that are around you. There's diamonds every place, and not worry about the things that you can't get or not around you. And I thought, what a great title, because Atherton has been acres of diamonds, lives that have been beautiful and wonderful diamonds. And so I got to, for the last about 18 months, have been on a treasure hunt. I'm not looking for gold, I'm looking for diamonds. And it's been delightful, and I just want to share a few those with you and tell you a little bit about that. So I want you to meet, so this is a gentleman by the name of George Ballantyne and his wife, Winifred. They were the first residents of Atherton because they were the caretakers of Atherton when it was in Burbank. They started and they went into that building and began to care for it. George was retired, but Winifred was relatively young. George's story was as a minister, and basically was educated in the East and made his way west all of his life. And there are so many of the stories of ministers who started out trained in the East and came to California. They came to the Golden State. That was the 20th century of people coming this way to live in California, and he was one of those. He pastored from 1902 to 1904 in a little church in a little town called Selma, California. That's where I pastored. That's where you pastored. That's where John and Sherry pastored. He was there for 2 years. He was part of one of the founding, that church was founded in 1885, so he wasn't the first, but he was there for 2 years. And then he in 1920s. So she lived for almost 40 years, over 40 years as a widow. She ended up, interestingly enough, when Burbank was sold, because they moved from Burbank to Alhambra, when that was sold, she was in Glendale. They'd left to go to Glendale. And later on, she came back when Atherton came to Alhambra and started being a matron just for a couple years, and then wrote and then lived here. And she's in a lot of the early pictures in different kinds of places. But the reason that I mention all this is because in 1949, she wrote this document, typed this document, and it was an early history of Atherton. And between her and another gentleman by the name of John Newton wrote. Both of these were personal accounts from that. And so this is the letter that she wrote, and this is how I kind of began. You can kind of see here. I'm just going to read for a second. when Mrs. Hannah Atherton Baldwin, by hearing an aged minister in the morning after spending the night in her father's house, he was telling the Lord he could not preach anymore and he had him. Have you heard this before? Yeah, that we tell. This is a religion story. And she wrote that down, and that was very... '51, a little girl overheard two old preachers. Instead of one, now it's two. But, you know, preachers, they multiply. Who had been entertained overnight in the Father's house, praying for adjoining room that God would provide a shelter over their heads in the days when they could work no more. She was so touched, and so she would do that. And so all of that's fine, and that worked out fine until I found this document. So this is that same one. So 4951. This document was in 1920. This document was, this was in 1914. This is one of the original documents. Here's the story. Years ago, a Baptist girl who had been recently married but was still in her teens accidentally overheard the prayers of two ministers who were guests in her home. So when I first read that story about a girl, did you think a married young woman? You thought a girl about 8, 12, somewhere in that range, right, that heard the ministers pray, and she heard one or two. We just don't know, okay? And now this story here is that she was a married young lady. So which is it? Don't know. Don't know. We got a controversy on our hands right here in River City. Okay. So anyway, I will tell you what I think a little bit about it. I think actually that it was the young girl as opposed to this. And here's the reason why. In the course of the book, I spent a good amount of time trying to put together the story of who Anna Atherton Baldwin was. And I was able to write a pretty decent biography. She was actually born in 1831. Did you know Hannah was born at the same time when there was still living a person who had signed the Declaration of Independence? Yeah. 1831. Her family, and she was in Vermont, and her family had moved to Vermont because her grandparents, after the Revolutionary War, had moved west to Vermont. Did you ever think of west as being Vermont? They were in Massachusetts. They moved west to Vermont because they could get land, and there was kind of a family compound there. Her father and mother married, and she was the third, I think, of 5 children. Her older brother died before she was born. Her younger sister died when she was about 7 or 8 years old. But the interesting thing about Hannah is her father died when she was 8. And her mother was orphaned. And her mother died when Hannah was 18. And she was, as a result of that, a kind of tossed around. There's different locations where she's living. She met this gentleman by the name of Oswald Baldwin, and they were married when she was 20. Okay? But they were married in Illinois because he was a doctor. So I think that this one, and I don't know why this story took place, but I do think that Hannah, she heard it when she was a young girl. There is every evidence, though we don't know for sure, that she was raised in a godly family. That was the nature of it, that her and Osgood, that was very important, and it's basically because the gifts that they gave years later when they were in California. But Osgood, they spent most of their lives in Illinois. There's an interesting story at her funeral, and I put this in the book, about there's a newspaper article about friend of Lincoln passed away. And it tells the story. She used to tell a story that she knew Abraham Lincoln when she was in Illinois and used to come to their house. And then they came to California. Osgood was a real estate speculator, and that's how he made his money. Got to California in the 1880s. And if you know anything about L.A. in the 1880s, there was a lot of land. there were not many houses and a lot of land. And so he was buying and selling lots and made a fortune, and then he was able to give that fortune away. So that's a part of that. And all of that, those things I kind of were just fascinating to see about who these people were. And I put those stories in the book to try and give you a better understanding of who Hannah was, who Osgood was. I can find pictures of Hannah. I have never found a picture of Osgood. It just proves that men don't like pictures. Okay, and so there's not one there, but it tells you a little bit about the stories. And actually, that little letter that she wrote, that Mrs. Ballantyne wrote, I put that in the book too. It's not very long, and so you can see that. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yeah, I have no idea. It's a promotional picture. You know how marketing people are. They just find a picture and slap it up there. Come to California. Okay. This is actually a picture of the villa. That's what it looked like in Burbank. That's what that building was, yeah, and tells you a little bit about that. So anyway, so I'm reading through this book, A Bright Spot on the Horizon. I'm reading through that book, and I don't know why. I read it several times, but I'm reading it again, and it says, we don't know anything about the people who first came to Atherton from Burbank. We learned a few things from her letter. I learned about some people that had been in Burbank, and I wrote biographies about each one of those fascinating missionaries who had been in China and been pioneer missionaries in China. But I'm reading across this book, and it says, we know nothing about the people who moved from Burbank to Alhambra except Nellie Fife. Who in the world is Nellie Fife? So anyway, so come to find out, Nellie Fife was a missionary who went to Japan in the 1880s. She was one of the first American Baptist missionaries in Japan. And she was there, and she actually helped form a girls' school at Sendai, which other missionaries that came to Atherton, retired at Atherton, are also a part of. And then after she left there, she came back to the States and went to Seattle and began to work in missions at the First Baptist Japanese Sunday School here in that. And so I have no picture of Nellie Fife. I don't know who it is, but I believe in this picture Nellie's there. And it's either this lady or it's this lady. And you can take your pick, and we can start a war. Okay? She was a wonderful lady that served missions, and then she came to Los Angeles, and she actually took and started Sunday schools out of San Pedro. Did you know that there were Japanese fishing camps in San Pedro during that early part of the 20th century? And she was down there doing missions and caring for them, and then eventually was ready to retire and came to Atherton when she heard about it in Burbank, and then came here. Isn't that a fascinating story about that? Such an interesting story. So interesting. I have no picture of Nellie. I have a name, and you can take your pick there. So I'm not sure. But anyway, that's it. So the reason we really have any stories about Atherton is because of this man. His name is Harold Philpotts. He's called HBO Philpotts in all the documents. And he came to Atherton about 1954. He was retiring, and he retired here. And he actually had a house on campus, and he put a sign up there that said, "Done moving." Because he had traveled the United States with the gospel. So he came here, and between 1954 and 1965, he was the director of publications. He was the chief promotion officer, and he wrote a whole series of monthly, quarterly publications about Atherton. They were called the Atherton Reporter, and he told stories over and over again. And you can kind of see him. That's his picture. He was a preacher. He went around. Here he is with the first, some of the first residents of Atherton. Here, I believe this is the villa. There he is, right there. And here he is. They're building between 54 and 65. There was a lot of building that went on at Atherton. This is Reverend Phil Potts. This is a guy by the name of Sam B. West that I'll talk about in a little bit, the first CEO of Atherton. And this is a gentleman by the name of George Colby, and he was the second CEO of Atherton. And during those years, Atherton's campus grew tremendously here in this area. And Dr. Phil Potts was the one that let people know, and he was always raising money and raising awareness of Atherton all through Southern California over and over and over again. And in that reporter, he did two things that helped me a lot to give you an idea of who the people were that lived here. He wrote in this about a small brochure about the 43 missionaries that were living at Atherton in the 1960s. And he wrote little vignettes of each of them. And I took that and I wrote longer, researched their lives and found out more about them and was able to find that. And then he wrote another one about the 25 ministers that were living at Atherton. And so I took that one and expands them. Did you know it's harder to find information about ministers than it is missionaries? And this is the treasure hunt part of this. Because in the early part of the 20th century, missionaries sent out by American Baptists had a whole series of paperwork to qualify to go. And it became part of the American Baptist Missionary Union. And all those files are actually online. And it is so fascinating to just